Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being the show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the finale of The Sinner. A fantastic finale. So much, everything was answered. I'm going to immediately say that right off the board. I appreciate it because, like I said, we got most of it wrapped up last episode, but now we're just filling in the last little blanks in this whole, situation. And I appreciate obviously I have some questions here and there about certain things, but I'll kind of get to that when I get to them. But overall, it's just a fantastic open and closed story, and I appreciate that. Obviously, let's start off with just breaking things down. Immediately, last episode, I was like, okay, obviously, it's got to be Todd. Todd's like the business partner in this whole situation. Obviously, he's covering up some stuff. It turns out, no, couldn't have been Todd. For one, Todd's dead, but he still died in the past 2 years. No, it's like Todd, after everything was said and done, immediately left. So there's no way he could have been here because he was renewing his vows with his wife apparently, and he was going for a month. So there was no way he could have been here dealing with holding Cora captive. And that's what I also appreciate about the episode too. It wasn't just oh man, it's all said and done. Cora, we're good right from the beginning. It's nah. It's things look bad for Cora. She gets 30 years because she waived her right for a trial, so she can't even use what was happening as even they can't go to trial to kind of even she can't even defend herself. It's just kind of an open and shut thing in this process, and I appreciate it because it hits everybody hard. It hits Cora hard, especially now because she remembers everything. She knows it still sucks that she killed Frankie, but understanding everything that went down. Now, it just sucks because she at the beginning she was just I did it. Let's leave it at that, because she was so confused and she just it's kind of something too that I want to bring up too. Is for one, I kept thinking okay, what role does her parents play in this? It's the only role her parents played is basically setting up the situation of understanding how they eventually got to where they were, because they just wanted freedom. They were just trying to live their lives. Their mom was very controlling. Once again, their dad had their own issues with their mom, but it was he was on the sidelines. He wasn't as strict as her. He didn't have the same guidelines as her, but it's he just let things happen and be the way they were. So that's what that's supposed to represent. Also, her upbringing being all that, being her mom in particular being super religious and blaming everything. It's no, it's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. It's actually kind of interesting because that's actually why Harry admits he's that's what I immediately locked onto that when we first met, when I was first interviewing you, because he's I know that blame, because he does it himself, which I'll kind of dive into that a little bit later on, but. I also appreciate the fact that Harry couldn't let the case go. Even Gloria was telling it, and I appreciate that too. Gloria wasn't at the beginning, it seems obviously she's a good cop coming into this. It's a little suspicious that you're trying so hard. It's what's it's because Cora's a pretty late. What's up with that? So, but it did seem like she's no, it's a good job. You've uncovered all of this. Cora remembers everything. It's the pieces are lining up. It's oh, maybe the guys that killed JD were, hired, I guessed as much too. It's no, they weren't. They were the business that JD was running. They killed him because they were just suspicious. They thought his wife getting arrested, him getting arrested. His girlfriend getting arrested, him getting arrested. The dude, Duffy, Daniel just kind of got super angsty about the whole situation. And that's why he killed JD, because he thought JD was going to turn on him. So it's it was an almost unrelated but at the same time related situation. I guess arguably you could call it once again karma coming back to get him in a certain way, because we end up finding out ultimately, because I love that it's super cop Harry on the case and everything, solving everything and figuring things out. He ends up meeting up with Maddie. Maddie seems like she's good, seems like she has a child. I assume just happy family situation. She's that night she got as far away from JD as she could. Lucky for her, things kind of happened the way they did. JD kind of was tired, quote unquote tired of her, so it was kind of good because that gave her a chance to just leave. That relationship was toxic. But what was a clue for Harry was the fact is that she talked about the fact that JD kept calling her about a business proposition that was selling Oxy, the whole drug thing he was doing. And then it's oh, he called her about that after what happened that night. Because, it makes it seem like the business didn't exist prior to that night. So whatever went down, whoever he was connected with, he started the business afterwards. So that's when he started putting the pieces together. What to me, bro, I was okay, who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? All this stuff. I was I'm not sure, who's going to turn out to be. And it turns out to be Frankie's parents. Specifically his dad. He was the one in the mask and everything. I was that's crazy. I was okay, is the mom not complicit in all this? Because I should have figured as much. Arguably, it's well, for one, they lied about Frankie's alibi and stuff like that. Oh, he was in LA at the time, but it's oh no, obviously he wasn't here. But I was like, well, maybe he snuck back without them realizing. It's like, no, they knew he was here, and they told him, his dad told him to go back to LA. I was like, okay, maybe the mom doesn't. And I was like, no, she knows. She was even saying at points like, oh, that poor girl, her family must be worried. Sadly, they didn't know about her parents being, her mom being the way she was. But yeah, the whole thing was to protect Frankie. They drugged her because I mean, going back to it, like like I swear, these last couple episodes have done nothing but go like, man, JD is a garbage human being. Like, not only like it's just like he seemed okay, but it's like, once again, every time you go back to that first interaction between him and Mason, it's like, you smug, disgusting bastard, and you're laughing like, oh, you don't know anything. You're a garbage person, and it's like, holy crap. I almost feel so bad for that actor, because that's gotta suck, because it's like, once you do something terrible like this, like, people are like, oh, I remember you was that. Like I said, I remember him as, you know, his, I think the actor's name, is it Jacob Pitts? Like I said, I know him from, like, he was one of the main characters in Justified, which I need to go back and rewatch. I got through most of that series. I don't think I ever saw, like, the final 2 seasons. That's neither here nor there, but it's just one of those things, like, you play that piece of crap character I will probably always associate you with. But nevertheless, like, the fact is, he blackmailed Frankie's dad into this, like, because he was even like, oh man, Frankie's like, no, there's nothing that went wrong. It was an accident, you know. He tried to save Phoebe and everything, but, you know, JD tried to twist it. It's like, oh yeah, well, the cops start asking questions. I'm like, oh yeah, Frankie, yeah, he was having sex with that sick girl, and then she died. The same one that's dead right now. Ooh, yeah, and like, start kind of twisting things in a negative light. It's like, if I'm going down for this, you're going down too, essentially. You know, from the very beginning, you can tell he was going to use this as an opportunity to try and blackmail Frankie, given the opportunity. I wonder, did he know that Cora was still alive? I wonder, prior to, like, the whole murders happening, because it seemed like it was going to be Frankie killing her. I mean, Frankie's dad looked like he was going to kill her, but he couldn't. So that's what this whole thing was, but he just couldn't bring himself to kill her because, you know, Phoebe is a different story. She was already dead. So, but it's another thing, killing someone else. So he took care of her. He actually brushed her hair. He got her high and everything, but that was all for the purposes of making her forget everything. And I said it the moment all that played out. I was like, it's sad. It's like, in a way, it's super ironic because he did all of that to protect his son, but arguably all of that led to his son eventually getting killed. Like, at worst, your son would have went to jail. There would have been some, like, criminal aspects to this whole thing. It still would have, quote unquote, ruined his life and everything. But he ultimately tried to protect his son by inadvertently doing that. Like, all that suppressed stuff came out in that form for Cora, and she ended up inadvertently killing Frankie. Like, it wasn't his fault. It was an accident. Because she even herself said it was like, Phoebe died in the arms of a man that loved her, and she loved him, you know? So it just super terrible, sad, and ironic that it played out like that. That was another thing too. Cora sat down and talked with her mom. She will probably never interact with her mom for the rest of her life. It's like, she probably hasn't subsequently since this whole situation. One thing I misunderstood previously to this was like, I was under the impression Phoebe died at home. Like, that's why I was like, oh, Cora left and Phoebe died like that month she was missing or whatever. Because that's what it seemed like the conversation was when they came to talking about her with the parents. But it's like, they didn't bring up the whole Phoebe being missing thing, mainly because the mom knew about their plan to go to Florida. This was all why Cora told her what actually happened. She's like, oh, this is your fault. You tainted my little girl, essentially, and stuff like that. Like, you're a terrible person. This all happened because of you. Your sister was in a ditch or whatever. But it's like, why didn't you look for us? Like, she's like, yeah, because I thought you had left. And she's like, oh, you're trying to get away from me because I'm some monster. It's like, you kind of were. Everything happened because they wanted their freedom. And like, that's going back to what I was saying earlier. I thought their family had some nefarious part, and maybe eventually their family had some nefarious part of it. It's like, no, it's just set up to be like why they ended up in that situation in the first place. Is mainly because of their mom, but also, once again, their dad, because he did nothing in this situation. So, I mean, first and foremost, before even like the end result of the episode, I do appreciate that Mason brought Lane to see Cora. It was the first time in the entire series since she'd been locked up that he had done that, and they're kind of having a family moment and everything. She's like, maybe it's not a good idea. I don't want to hurt him any more than this, and I've already have it. And Mason's like, no, he he's going to need his mom. She's like, but maybe it's best for you to both move on. It's like, no, we're going to be here every week on Thursday. And it's like, through thick and thin, it's like, he didn't have her back all the way before, but now, like, knowing everything, knowing the truth, it's like, I'm here. We will be by your side, like, no matter what, and it's like, but now it works out more beautifully because, like, when it was all said and done, yes, she's still locked up, but she's on like a 2-year kind of, almost like basically she's put in a special psychiatric, unit essentially to basically be examined over the next 2 years, and then they'll determine whether or not she's a risk to herself or anyone else, and if she's not, she could be ready to go. So that's, obviously, like, she still did kill Frankie, but it was in extenuating circumstances. So like I said, it was just it's just a happy conclusion. I even love Harry's partner being like, hey man, he's like hugging him, and he's like, Harry's like, what are you doing? He's like, good job, man. Just congrats. Because Harry was the only one that didn't back down from the situation. He was the only one that kind of looked the more positive side of things. So, multiple times throughout the episode, obviously he's helping him out. He's like, yo, don't worry, Harry, I got it. Yep, already did. He's like, Harry's like, okay, good job. And then even at one point offering to bring Harry over for like, hey, you can come over for dinner or whatever. But it's like Harry wasn't, because he, so focused on the case and everything, trying to help out Cora, because he felt guilty, because out of anything, like, he was the one that kept pushing Cora, like, hey, remember, I'm going to be the one to help you. And ultimately he did. And there was even a moment at the end where, like, she kind of leans against him and he kind of hugs her. So, like I said, we don't really exactly, like I brought up earlier, and I'll kind of elaborate more. Like, I completely missed that whole aspect of, like, something happened to him when he was younger, why he's kind of quirky the way he is, probably doesn't really talk to people a lot. Like, why that whole strangulation situation happens with that lady, like, he was kind of having an affair with like, that whole situation. So it's like, that was some kind of, like, his way of dealing with some trauma from the past. Just like Cora's way was what happened to Frankie, it came out in some other shape or form, and as well as his other quirks, or probably his whole thing about plants and stuff like that plays a role in that. But I didn't totally pick up, he's like, people doing stuff to us when we were younger. I completely missed that aspect. Was this their first time mentioning that, or had that come up before? Like, I'd never really, I remember him and Cora kind of bonding before, like when they were in a car, but it's like, I don't remember that exact content. I remember he's like, yeah, I'm a little different. Like, we're kind of almost like saying we're wired different, but I completely missed the fact that, like, something actually happened to him. Is that something that ever's going to be, was elaborated on? Because, like, obviously this is like a one-off series. It's a limited series, but I guess that's also one of those things where it's like, kind of depends on how well the show does. If it does extremely well, they might continue it. Because I do know this is based off a book, but I don't know how far the book goes. It seems like this would be the entire book. It's something I'm going to look into afterwards to find out, like, how different this was from the book that this is based on. But like I said, overall, like, a happy ending all across the board. I'm surprised there wasn't more with Caitlin and Mason, because it seemed like they were setting that up, but I guess it was just the whole, like, her feeding him information and him kind of going all crazy about it, and Caitlin being like, dude, stop doing this. You're going to mess up everything doing things the way you are. So, because that is kind of a thing too, is like, when it's all said and done, you never actually got a conclusion to Harry's story. We don't know where his whole situation, like, subsequently, since him passing out, he didn't really interact with that lady, but we see him kind of looking at his nails. Don't know if he ever made things 100% work with Faye, which I kind of think, like, nah, that's through. But like, I don't know if he ever went back to that lady. Like, maybe it's almost a situation of, like, he's kind of a little broken inside. And once again, like I said, he saw Cora blaming herself and everything, and, like, part of that's from her family upbringing combined with what happened to her, and because of her family upbringing, her way of dealing with, like, what happened to her, repressing and blaming herself for it. It seems like Harry kind of did a similar thing, so that's why he kind of does the whole, like, choking situation as a way to make himself, like, almost like punish himself. So it seems like by helping fix Cora, he was kind of inadvertently fixing himself, because when he saw Cora, like, it was already kind of established before now, but he saw a little bit of himself in Cora. So I guess that's kind of what he felt like. If he did this right thing, if he helped her, maybe it helped him. And you kind of see at the end, and the question is, you even see him kind of looking in, like, the mirror of his car almost, and then looking at his nails. Like, I think it's, I guess it's him trying to see whether or not he has, like, done that. Like I said, I'm curious to see whether there would be anything beyond that. Because if it was, it'd probably just be like Harry on a different case. But I think it's just like at the very least, in the context of the series, once again, I don't know about the book, but at least the context of the series, it's like, I think it's one of those situations where it's like I'd like to know more, but at the same time I'm fine with it just being that. I do see some stuff kind of labeling this as like a season finale. That's why I'm talking like this, but I'm pretty sure this is like a one and done series, like the whole limited thing. But once again, like I said earlier, I think those can sometimes change depending on whether or not the series does well. If it does well, it's like cool, we'll possibly make more, find a way to write more. But if it doesn't, it's like, hey, the story's complete. Yeah, we had some questions, sure, but at the end of the day, it's like the main stuff is covered. Harry's story is kind of a side plot because it's like one of the things, aside from the main mystery, that was like a big subplot in the story, like Harry's whole deal. So I don't know, I just thought it was kind of interesting. Just kind of want to talk about that for a second. So it's one of those situations where, I mean, it's kind of like they left it on a happy note, but it's not like a perfectly happy note of like, oh man, she's back with her husband. Because going forward, it's not going to be that easy because no matter what happens, she still killed Franklin. So obviously there's some issues there. But after everything that happened to her, trying to get her life back together, people like calling her a killer, like that stigma will never go away. So I mean, that's kind of being on a downer. So let's not focus on that too much. But that's gonna be like where my brain goes, because my brain always does that when things end. It's like, well, what about beyond? I like to imagine this, and that. I'd like to imagine, no matter what, that when it was all said and done, people will look at it as like, oh no, Cora, she was a victim. They won't look at her as a killer. They will look at her as a lady who went through a lot, who suffered. So that circumstances played out to make her the way she is. It might even turn bad against her parents. Like, you could be like, arguably it's their fault, partly to blame for everything happening. But once again, that's just kind of diving too deeply. Just let's leave it at the fact is that she's back home with her husband and her son and happily ever after. Let's leave it at that. So like I say, it's just kind of interesting that they didn't give it like this absolutely perfect ending. It was a good ending, but it wasn't like an absolutely perfectly like 100% she got her off scot-free, because that was a good question I was curious about. Even when the mystery was solved, how would it still play out for her? Still would played out positively. It's not nearly as bad as it was before. Like 32 years versus 30 years, big difference there. So especially considering everything she went through too, that was kind of that was kind of a prison of its own after everything that she went through, everything that went down with Phoebe and stuff like that. So the bottom, I loved seeing everything happen, like the mystery unravel, like this, getting pieces added up at a time, seeing everyone play in their respective roles in this whole situation. Fantastic series all around. If I would highly recommend, if you know someone that likes mystery series, I highly recommend you recommend this to them. It's a very good series. I think it's well worth anyone's time, especially considering it's only 8 episodes too. Nevertheless, I'll leave it all at that. So, but really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.